now that we have learned about forms and control components in React and how control components can be used to control the forms in React, let's move on to this exercise where we will see how we actually implement control forms inside a control component in our application. We will implement our form in the contact component. And so going into the contact component, let me import a few more components from React Stack that will enable us to implement the form controls. So let's import button, form group, label, input, and call. Then since we need to store the state of the form in the state of our React component, we need to turn this component into a class component. And that's the only way it'll be able to support controlled forms. So let's go ahead and turn this into a class component. So to do that, first, let me import React component from React, and then go in here and then turn this into class contact extends component. And when we do that, the return value should be enclosed inside the render function. So let me implement the render method here, and then let's go ahead and cut the whole code here within the return and then put it inside the render function here. So with this, our component is now upgraded to a class component, and so we can now store the state within our component. So to reflect the state into our component, let's go ahead and instantiate the constructor for our contact component. So in the constructor, we'll say super props, and then let's define the state which reflects the information from the form that we're going to create here. In the form, I'm going to have a field for first name, which I will initialize to empty, last name, which also is an empty string at the moment, telnum, which stores the telephone number also as an empty string, email also as an empty string. Then we'll have a boolean called agree, which we will set to false. Then contact type, which we will set to tell. This would be used for a select form control, and we'll see how we make use of this in a short while. And then message, which will be also an empty string at the moment. So with this, we have set up all the properties within our state that can then be linked to our form. So let's go ahead and implement the form. To implement the form, let's go down below here in the contact component. So we see that we have inside the container div here. So inside the container div, let me go ahead and create another row, and inside this row we'll implement the form for us. So we'll say div so inside this column we'll implement a heading for our form. So we'll say send us your feedback. Send us your feedback. And once we have that in place, then we can go ahead and implement our form here. So we'll say div call 12 call md9. So inside this next column, which will be stacked below anyway, below this label here, we'll implement our form. So to create a form, we will start out by defining a form within this div here. And in this form, we will create the various elements of the form. So we'll say form group. If you have taken the Bootstrap course, you understand what a form group is meant for. The form group allows you to define that as a row here. So this is one row of the form here. And then inside here we'll say label. So this form group row allows us to use Bootstrap's grid inside the form to lay out the various form elements. So that's why I am applying the row, and inside there we can apply the classes to this to implement that. So label for, so we'll create our first form element here, and that would be for the first name. And then when you say MD is equal to 2 for medium to extra large screen sizes, this label will occupy 2 columns in this row. So from your Bootstrap knowledge, you can understand what this is doing. And then I'll say first name label here. So that creates a label inside this form group. So the label will be positioned to the left in the form group, and then to the right of it, we will position the input box for inputting the information for our first name. And also again here I am taking the help of React Strap form elements. So we'll use the form group, which is React Strap's re-implementation of Bootstrap's form group. And then in here I will use column MD10. So this specifies that for medium to extra large screen sizes, this would form a column. So call in React Strap is like saying div class name is equal to call -md-10. So that's condensed into this format using the React Strap call component here. So inside this, I will design my input. What kind of input is it? This is of the type text input, so we expect the user to type in the text here. I'll give this an ID as first name, and then name as first name, so that this will tie itself to this label here. So this should be HTML for. Now if you use simple for here, again, because this is going to be JSX, the simple for will be confused with JavaScript's for, so that's why we'll have to use label HTML for here. So input type text first name, name first name, and then we'll say placeholder is first name, and we will tie this to the control components state. So we'll say this state first name. So by tying this value to the control component state, now this becomes a controlled form, so that any changes here will be reflected into the React components state here. So that is the input here. And after having done this, let's go and take a look at our form in the browser. Going to our browser, in the contact us page, right below here, you now see our form taking shape here. So it says send us your feedback, and then first name and the input box here with the first name here. This one is laid out using the Bootstrap, or rather React Straps form grid support. So this is occupying 2 columns here, this is occupying 10 columns there. So first name, like that I will lay out the last name, the telephone number, the email, and the other fields here. So we'll complete the form step by step, and then once we are done with that, then we will tie this form's control into our React Straps state there. Now, just like we had the first name, I'm going to create the next one, which is the last name here. So we'll go into the next one, and then we'll say last name, and edit this to last name. So remember to change all these to last name, and then we tie this to the state value of last name here. Similarly, the next row would be for the telephone number, which I'm keeping it simple. I'm just going to allow the user to type in the entire telephone number in a single box there. So we'll say label for telnum MD2, and then this would be contact telephone number, and the input type is tel, so that'll get telnum, and the ID is telnum, name is telnum, and then the placeholder would be telephone number, and then we'll tie this to the telnum state property. Telephone number, let's do the next one, which is email. So the next row would be email. So you see that we can create various form elements like this. And then let's save the changes and take one quick look at our application in the browser. Going to our browser, you can now see 4 fields in here: first name, last name, telephone number, and email. Let's add a couple more. Those were fairly straightforward. The next one, I am going to add in a checkbox and a select control into my form there. So let me go ahead and create this as a form group. So inside this form group, let's create a checkbox control here. So inside the form group, we'll say call MD. Now, I can even specify the number of columns by saying size equal to 6 as a JavaScript object inside that braces there, and then I can even specify the offset for that. So what this is telling me is that this will occupy 6 columns with an offset of 2 columns. So for this particular row, I don't have a label, but I need to push all this to the right within my form. So that's what we are doing here. So column size offset 2, this one, and then I will create one more column down below here, which will occupy 3 columns and then an offset of 1 here. Now within these 2 columns, let me implement what I need. So within the first column, I will implement a form group check. So this is for a checkbox that I'm going to implement here. So for the checkbox, form group check, and then we'll say label check. So this is how we would implement a form group with a for a checkbox with a label here. So I'll say input type checkbox. You know what a checkbox does. And then the name is agree. And for this one, I'll tie its property value checked to this state agree. And then after that, let's give a 1 space here, and then we'll say may we contact you. So this is just a label that is following this checkbox so that the user understands what this checkbox is asking you about. So that's a checkbox there. And then in the second column here, I'm going to create a select control here. So we'll go into the second column and then we'll say input type select. So the name is contact type, and the value will be tied to this state contact type, and inside here we'll specify the options for the select. So there are 2 options for the select, so we'll say option tell and email as the 2 options. So what does this add here? So you can see that this is a checkbox with a label there, and then this must add a select. So let's go and take a look at this. Going to our application in the browser, you can now see that we have added a checkbox here, which currently we don't know how to handle this yet. We'll do that in the second part of this exercise. And then you see a select here, which allows us to select between 2 options, tell and email, and by default it will be tell here. Now continuing with our form here, we will add in another form group here, and that would be of the type text area. So I'm just going to copy this email thing that we have here and then use that to construct this form group. So in the next one, we'll say form group row label HTML4 is feedback and MD2, and then here we'll say your feedback. So we are asking the user for some feedback about whatever it is that we ask the user to submit. So the input would be of the type text area, so that it will be a long box here, large box there with multiple rows, so that the user can type in a lot more information here. The ID is feedback, or rather we'll call this as message, and the placeholder is, we don't need a placeholder for this, we can just put a box in there. But then let me set the number of rows of this text area to 12 rows. So we'll give 12 rows here, and then we'll tie this to message here. And then the last form group that I'm going to add is a button, the submit button here. So for the submit button, let's go ahead and add a row here, and inside this row we'll say column MD size 10 offset 2 and then this would be of the type button, which is a submit button, and color would be primary, so blue colored button there. And then for the button we'll give the text as send feedback. Now that we have completed the form, let's save the changes and take a look at the complete form there. Now going back to our contact page, you see the completed form here. So you can see that you have 4 fields here, and then we have the checkbox, and then you have a text area, and then a button here called send feedback. Now, of course, when the user clicks on the button, you want to be able to retrieve what the user has typed in this form and then be able to see that. So since this is tied to the state of the React application, the submission of the form should be handled within the React application. Not only that, whenever any thing is changed in any of these elements, that should be reflected in by changing the state of the component to reflect whatever is in the box here. So we will implement 2 different handlers that will take care of handling this form here. So to do that, let's go back to our code. In the code, we will implement 2 different methods here. We'll say handle input change, which will receive the event as a parameter. That is 1. And then we'll say handle submit, which also receives the event as a parameter. So when you click on the submit button, the handle submit should be called. And then when the form is submitted, right now what I'm going to do is I will just log the current state, which reflects the state of my component anyway. So inside here we'll say, we'll just log the state here, nothing more than this. And also we'll generate an alert with the same information so that the user sees that the form has been submitted. And the default behavior when you submit a form in any browser is to go to the next page. So we will prevent that from happening. So we'll say event prevent the default behavior. So this is how the handle submit is implemented. So how do we make use of this handle submit? To do that, we'll go to the form here, and for the form, whenever the submit button is clicked, the on submit attribute is tied into the handle submit function like this. Now, in addition, in order to make this handle submit method available for use like the way we did with the form, we need to bind this in the constructor. So here in the constructor, we'll say this handle submit is this handle submit bind this. We have seen this already in one of the previous exercises, why we need to bind this. Similarly, while I am here, I might as well bind the handle input change also. So let me just copy that and then paste that into the next line, and then we'll just say this handle input change is this handle input change bind this. So these two are required in the constructor of the contact component. Let's save the changes. Now, going to our browser, if I try to type anything into the forms, nothing is shown in the box here. That is because when I make any changes to the input box, this is tied to the state of my controlling component. Since any change that I do to the input box is not reflected into the state, and since the value of each of these is tied to the state of the application, that's why I don't see anything being reflected into the forms here. So how do we tie these two together? So that is where this handle input change method comes to our rescue. So in the handle input change method, we'll make sure that this is invoked upon any change to any input value in our form. So, and when this is invoked, then we will retrieve the target input from the event that has just been passed in. So this event will carry which particular input has been changed. So after that, we need to check to see. So we'll say const value is target type So if the target type is a checkbox, if it is a checkbox, then we'll have to change or retrieve the value from the target checked. Otherwise, we'll retrieve the value from target value here. And we'll retrieve the name of the particular input that has been changed from target name here. So event target type, event target name. So since we have done target is equal to event target, we're able to do target type and target name. So if it is a checkbox, then the value is retrieved from the target.checked. Otherwise, the value is retrieved from target.value. So as you can see, when we tied in the input boxes to the form state, we either tied in the value or the checked appropriately. Now, since we know the particular input box that has been changed, so from the name we retrieve that, and the name is also the same as how we define the state properties here. So remember to make sure that the names that you give to the input box would be the same as what you use for the properties in the state. So that way, all that you need to do is, here we'll say this set state. So at this point, any change that is done to any of the input boxes will result in the state being changed. Whose state? The state of the particular input that has been modified. So that's why we'll say name value. Okay, so see, remember we got the value from the input that has been changed. So if it is a checkbox, we get it from target checked. If it is another kind of input, then we get it from the target value. And then that value, you will set that particular state property to that value here in the handle input change. So this way, any change that you make to any of the input in your form will immediately get reflected into the state. Now, how do we tie these two together? So to tie these two together in your form, for each of these items, for each of these inputs, I need to tie the on change to this handle input change. So on change. So whenever this input is changed, any change is made to the input, then this will result in a call to the handle input change, which will reflect the change in the input value back to the state of my form there. So I will add the same thing to all the forms inputs here. So last name, tel num, email. Oh, I forgot to change that to email. So if you notice any errors in the way your form is behaving, it could be that you might have forgotten to change these values to reflect the correct value here. So that is one place where you can go and look to see if that is where you made a mistake. For the checked here, we'll also say on change, input handle change. Then for this one also, the contact time on change. For the text area. And so now your form is all set up to immediately reflect any change into your state of your application. Let's save the changes and then go and take a look at our form. Going to our contact component, let's start typing in some value. Let's type in and some random value here. And then submit by clicking on the send feedback. So when we click on the submit, immediately you see an alert box pops up, and this reflects what the state in my React component is. And the state here in my React component is exactly what we typed into the form there. So now you see how with a controlled form you're able to submit the information to your React application, and then within the React application you're able to handle the submission of the form, and also by tying in the value of each of these inputs to the state of your control component, you're able to immediately reflect the change in the forms into the state of your application. Let me click on the OK so that I'll dismiss the alert there. With this, we have seen how our application can be updated to include a controlled form in one of our components. This is a good time for you to do a git commit with the message controlled forms.